This deliberate decision was the first departure from the plan of Genghis Khan to break the armed forces of the so-called civilized world and to lay it under tribute to the nomads in toto. Undoubtedly, at this point, Birkai was influenced by the news from the east, where Mangu's death had led to the first open breach in the Golden Family. But already in 1260 of the Common Era, a change was taking place within Birkai's horde. First, the nucleus of the native Mongols was growing thinner. Members of the House of Tului and of Ogadai were drifting back to the wars in the east. The preponderance of Turks in the Golden Horde increased until it became a reincarnation of the earlier Turkish clans, the Betchenaks and Kipchaks. In fact, the Russians spoke of it as the Kipchak, our desert horde, and called its members Tatars, not Mongols. Its language was Turkish and nothing else. Its inclination was to settle down after the Turkish fashion in a fixed, conquered area. The Golden Horde began, as it were, to live on its income. And since Turks were never disposed to bother themselves with the routine of collecting taxes, the Turkish Beskaks began to farm out the revenues to the diligent Muslim merchants, notably to a group from Khiva. These were the ones the Russians called the squeezers, for good reason. Then Birkai's intention to settle down on Volga was to enjoy this mystery. His mastery of the steppes was interrupted. A new power appeared in the south. Hulagu's juggernaut trundled by Samarkand, and then appeared farther west within sight of the Caucasus. Like Batu, Birkai felt himself to be an exile from the family, and he had no inclination to let another Mongol encroach on his new frontiers. So between the years 1255 and 1260, the years of crisis for the Mongol Empire, he was watching jealously the triumphal march of his cousin Hulagu. Hulagu, it seemed, had the secret of success. Hulagu had loaded his kibitkas with the spoil of the assassin citadels and Baghdad. Hulagu had slain under the hooves of the Mongol horses the last caliph of Baghdad, and Birkai was a convert to Islam. He had profaned sanctuary, he wrote to Hulagu, without first consulting the members of your family. And he heard that Hulagu had been named Idil Khan, or Lesser Khan, by Mangu, whose blood tie was closer to Hulagu than to Birkai. Moreover, Mangu had given a Yarlig granting to this Idil Khan the right to possess for himself and his children all the land he conquered. Then, when winter came, Hulagu made camp in the uplands south of the Caucasus Range, where he found good grazing for his herds. In the high valleys where the waters were sweet, that pasture land, even if it lay beyond the Caucasus, Birkai believed to be part of his heritage, and Hulagu built an astronomer's tower there, and a treasure house for the gold of Baghdad. There, Doku's Khatun, that strong-willed lady, sounded her chapel bells to the delight of the Armenians. Every religious sect proclaimed its faith openly. Angered Muslimin reported to Birkai, and no Muslim dares disapprove. Every Christian, whether the common people or the highest, has put on his finest garment and gone forth to sing. Christian Armenians and Jacobites and even Crusaders were flocking to Hulagu's Ordu, looking upon the dreaded Mongols as providential saviors against the Muslimin. If you pray for me, the good-natured Hulagu said, it will bring me good fortune. Now, there's nothing in Islam that allows them to force, such things. People are allowed their freedom of religion. I mean, they don't let people wander around naked, particularly in Mecca, or do a dog pilgrimage or something in Mecca. But other than that, they're not a Muslim is not allowed to forbid people their religion. They can say, "No, I like her. That don't like this is not right," but they can't force anything. Well, I mean, their religion forbids that. La Grafdin, and many other passages. The smoke of burning masajid, mosques, rose from his line of march, but Christian sanctuaries were spared. Okay, then they had a real reason to complain, and that has nothing to do with, they're being tolerant. No. A Muslim lord who resisted him was besieged and slain in an unpleasant manner. Pieces of his flesh cut from him and thrust into his mouth until he died. A Seljuk sultan abased himself before his conqueror, presenting him with a pair of boots. On the soles of the boots, the sultan's head had been painted, and he besought Hulagu, your slave desires to hope that his king will honor him by placing his august foot on the head of his slave. It amused Hulagu, but Birkai did not relish it when he heard of it. Seemingly, the Christian cross was being exalted beside the standard of Genghis Khan. Then, in the autumn of 1259, Hulagu turned south away from the Caucasus. Aleppo was stormed by his Tumans. Its great mosque burned. His Ordu swung down through Syria, entered Damascus. With it marched contingents of Christian knights from Antioch, led by Raymond VI, Georgians and Armenians. These lands, last held by their king, Haithon, Hulagu was bound for the Holy Land, where the Muslimin held Jerusalem. With that one exception, under far more peace and tolerance for the Christians than they had under Christian rulers. With Egypt occupied by the Mongols, the forces of Islam would be driven back again into the Arabian Desert and the North African coast, the limbos of the known world. Such suffering had not come upon Islam. The chronicler Ibn Athar relates, since the time of the Prophet, Mongol advance patrols had reached the plateau west of the river Jordan on the road to Egypt when, early in 1260, Hulagu received the tidings of the death of Mangu. The courier from Karakorum brought a summons to the Ilkhan to journey back to the Mongol homeland. Hulagu hesitated as well as he might. Mongol tradition called him back to the Gobi and the Kurdilatai of the blood kin, no matter how far away he might be. But his brother was dead. He would not see the face of Mangu again, and he had not carried out scrupulously all Mangu's commands. He had earned his reward, the fair valley of Samarkand, the gardens of Baghdad on the gray river, Damascus, the queen of cities, Jerusalem the golden. These were his, the appanage of the Ilkhans, a new world to be the seat of the dynasty he would found. In a few marches, he would cross the desert strip to Cairo on the Nile. After that, he would hold the mastery of the Near East. The sons of his body would be Ilkhans, heirs of the vanished Khalifa. They would have pleasure seats on the shores of the great sea by the blue water. There was no doubt of success. His army commander urged him to keep on. Why turn back at the last step? If Hulagu made the long trek homeward to the Kurdilatai, He would be gone for years. He would leave his new conquest exposed to Bir Kai, who would have become antagonistic, who would have gathered an army at the Caucasus. Doku's Khatun begged him to stay. Here he could rule unchallenged. In the Gobi he would be only one of 3 brothers, with no more than the memory of his great journey to hold on to. Her Christian advisors, Haithon, the Armenian, Bar Ra'as, the Syrian patriarch, added their voices to hers, for if Hulagu withdrew now, they would be exposed to the retaliation of the Mamluks of Egypt. They urged him to give Jerusalem to them. Then the armed crusaders on the coast, the Templars, and the Hospitallers would become allies, and in time, no doubt, Hulagu might make them his subjects. The Mongol officers for once agreed with the Christians, for the Mongol plan of conquest called for an avalanche advance, the men of the first conquered zone to be carried on into the next. Hulagu already had the Armenians and the Knights of Antioch and the Georgian mountaineers. There could be no halt in such an advance. Subutai, they remind Hulagu, had refused to turn back when the princes of the Golden Family disputed in Russia. Instead, he went on into Europe. Genghis Khan himself had laid down the saying that an attack on an enemy must never be given up. The Khakan, who is now dead, they said, gave command to destroy Egypt. Yeah, the point shouldn't be to destroy cultures. Hulagu pondered. In these days of his hesitation, the future of the Mongol Empire was not the only issue at stake. The possession of Egypt and the Nile, and the Muslim mastery of the Near East, and the ultimate fate of the Crusades hung in the balance. And Hulagu turned back. He sent a message to his brothers saying that he would join them on the Kerulan. With his horse herds and vast camp, he started north, but he had no Subutai to advise him in this evacuation. He had to make his own plans. In the end, he left Kitboga, his generals, with 1 division, and the Armenian and Georgian allies to hold the position by the Jordan. While the grass could still feed his herds, he moved north past the Caucasus. In the midsummer heat, he reached the high ground by Tabriz. There, a courier from Palestine overtook him with incredible news. Kitboga had been defeated and slain, and the Mongol army scattered and driven like sheep. Now, the land we know as Israel, between World War I and World War II, took the name of Palestine, which was given it by the Romans for the first time. Those who wallow for Satan, basically, to insult the Jews and again to insult the local inhabitants. Because Plishtan is, Tun as in the Tamtum, the Tiamat, the great female Satan, basically. And, the wallowers, they didn't call themselves this. This was a twist of some stuff. And Plusha, same thing. The Plusha, the Wanderers, that was an okay title for these people that, but, they twisted it further into something. Because there's no historical evidence that there was a Plishtan people. I mean, there were Satanists at the time, but, and were, or maybe you don't want to call them Satanists, but Tiamat worshippers. The defeat at the Well of Goliath. If the news astonished Hulagu, it amazed Western Asia no less. Not for 37 years had a Mongol division been worsted in battle. The Muslims, who had thought themselves to be at their last extremity, greeted the victory as if it had been a miracle, particularly as it had been gained by the army of Egypt, which had become the asylum of refugees, driven westward by the Mongol advance. This Egyptian army had in fact grown out of slaves, the warriors known as Mamluks, the possessed ones. The Mamelukes. In the beginning, these Mamluks had been boys brought as slaves and trained in arms to serve as the shadowy Khalifa of Cairo, as a bodyguard, young Bulgars, Turks, Circassians, and Georgians purchased in the slave markets of the Near East. And the elite slaves, you saw them sold in things that remind you of Jeffrey Epstein's place, sort of indicating something, right? Because there was abuses that he did and that other lady did. And the whole body beautiful movement in the first place is not everybody's beautiful, first of all, no matter how much makeup they put on. Some people just never are. But there's more shadowy issues than that, right? But S at the end, that's not a part of the plurals for Arabic, so there's confusion. They were, therefore, scions of the white race, for the Turks were white, who knew no other profession than that of war. The most daring of them were known as the white slaves of the river. And like those other Turks who had first served, then dominated the Khalifa of Baghdad, the Mamluks had soon made figureheads of the weaker Khalifa of Cairo. Their corps d'elite became the Halka or guard. Now, at this time, there were other competing, caliphates, as they call them. So, like around, in the country of Morocco, I think at one time there was like 4 different ones within those borders that we now look at. From the first inroads of the Mongols, the ranks of the Mamluks have been enlarged by Turkish elements uprooted in Khwarezmia and the Black Sea region, particularly by those wayward souls, the Turkomans of the white and black sheep. One member of this turbulent fellowship had the hardihood to believe the Mongols could be defeated, and thereby hangs a tale as strange as any of the 1,001 Nights. It is, in very truth, a page from the Nights, because the chief actor in it has inspired as many of its cherished adventures as Harun the Blessed, considered the opposite because of a certain act of tyranny that kind of spoiled his life, right? For much of the so-called Arabian Nights was written in Egypt. A deal of their coarse humor comes from the allies of Cairo, and the river is the Nile, not the Tigris. The unruly slaves, the Mamluks, and the blacks of the Sudan. The man in question is indeed an actor whose rare ability we have never appreciated. He is Baibars the Panther, better known by his nickname of the Crossbowman, and Friar William of Tripoli, who knew much of him, writes that as a soldier he was not inferior to Julius Caesar, nor did he yield in malignity to Nero. In person he is a Kipchak Turk, more than 6 feet tall, with one eye whitened by the scar that blinded it. He wields his sword with his left hand, and he delights in covering his body with gorgeous silks. His dossier informs us that as a boy, Baibars was conscripted by a Mongol army, taken captive and sold by Venetian slave merchants in the market of Damascus for about $90, rejected by the purchaser by reason of his blind eye, taken as a slave by Mamluk Amir, but Baibars knows the Mongol army and its methods from bitter experience. And what was $1 a day's wage? Or was it even less than $1 at the time that they're talking about? I think sometimes it was even a week's wage. He finds himself But if he wasn't considered that valuable slave, I guess maybe a day's wage, 90 days' wage, he finds himself in his element among the turbulent white slaves of the river. His skill with the crossbow earns him respect. His lack of any scruples wins a way to promotion. His roisterous humor endears him to the multitude in the streets where the wine shops ply their trade beside the hashish sellers, and the youngest harlots have to compete with Greek boys. Europe. The Europeans had to be told that 7 and 8 were, that 7 to puberty or 8 to puberty was too young. But so we're dealing with Europeans. We have even more of a problem with that. Baibars waste no time in becoming Emir of the Halka, second in command to Qutuz, the Mamluk, who can call himself Sultan because he has slain the last Sultan. In his capacity as head of that Oriental Foreign Legion, Baibars plays many roles. So that was an additional thing for me to oppose because I, can't. The wars to gain slaves is something that I absolutely do not believe is right. Since he trusts no one but himself, he provides his own intelligence service by going about in disguise. Incognito, he raids the public baths to carry off the choicest women, and he sells his haul of them openly the next day to build a hospital. Sometimes if you have what you call good intentions, that makes things even worse upon you spiritually. It's not good intentions. You know the phrase. He goes up the river with a fisherfolk and dreams of building a fleet. He leaves his cup companions and goes off unattended to appear the next day in Palestine. The fourth day in the Arabian desert, for he has a steppe dweller's ability to ride both far and fast. The crowds of Cairo worship him for his exploits and fear him. Worship is in speak well of and respect. Because they cannot know where the panther may be. He might be the tall Mamluk watching them from the parapet of Saladin's citadel, or the tall rider hunting antelope with leopards beyond the sheep pasture, or the tall pilgrim from Samarkand rocking in the pur at the elbow of the Qadi himself. And in Islam, we're supposed to stay still. Some people might have feet problems and can't stand in one place for a long time, but for the most part, these are people who are using caffeine or have other problems that they need to fix themselves spiritually. When he rides forth in state, Baibars is recognized by the horns and drums that go before him, and the black eunuchs in orange robes that guard his stirrup. To a soldier who strikes his fancy, he is capable of giving emeralds, or Christian girls, or an estate at Damascus. At a suspicion of revolt, he can behead 180 lords of Cairo. Well, again, I say that I'm against sex slavery, and in Egypt at that time, that was not something they were allowed to do with the children. But the orange is also something. The men aren't supposed to wear those really expensive dyed garments. Orange, red, certain reds and blues and purples were not allowed, but some of them were, I guess, because some of them were root dyes, and the orange but particular the orange and yellow saffron dyeing weren't. Since language is no barrier to this graduate of war, the slave market, he can talk intimately with Greeks and Arabs and blacks from the Nile's headwaters. While he does his own spying, he dictates in another hour and roll his own letters to Charles of Anjou the Venetians. He's gaining revenue by raiding the Venetian market craft at the time that he's collecting port dues from their enemies, the Genoese, and entertaining himself by playing the ambassadors of one proud city against the others until, to his vast amusement, he contrives a sea battle off the coast of the Holy Land between their fleets. With a following of Turks, he defeats the hosts of the allied crusaders at Gaza by the expedient of a counterattack, a lesson learned from the Mongols. He has managed to break the heart of Louis, King of the French, and repel a French crusade at Mansoura with Kutuz and a girl named Pearl Spray. He holds at his wayward disposition the Nearer East, until the coming of his former masters, the Mongols. Not starting up too easily with this, but my problem, I didn't mean that, but caffeine reduces the attention span and ability to pay attention, and even energy levels, and usually energy levels, despite the jolt. So that's what I meant earlier. Kutuz and Baibars took advantage of the terror caused by Hulagu's approach to seize openly the throne of Egypt, which actually rested in their hands. Our one necessity, said Kutuz, is to drive off the Mongols. To do that, a real leader is needed. In due course, Hulagu's preliminary summons came to Cairo. This is the word of him who rules the earth. Tear down your walls and submit. If you do so, peace will be granted you. If you do otherwise, that will not happen, which will happen. And what it is to be, we know not. The sky alone knows. The streets of Cairo were at that time filled with refugees who spread tales of the Mongols' power through the bazaars. To make certain that his turbulent and fearful masses would resist, Kutuz killed the Mongol envoys, hanging up the bodies in the four quarters of the city. After that, he could be certain that Cairo must defend itself or be doomed. Well, Kutuz, the Sultan in name, filled their war chests by confiscating the jewel stocks of merchants and appropriating the fortunes of lesser emirs. I don't know the Baibars, in his capacity of commander of the guard, recruited the fugitive bands of Turkomans and Arabs and summoned the wild Hawara of High Egypt with the Bedouin clans. He drafted the fighting men of Cairo in Totu, giving to the bastinado those who tried to hide. Between them, they mustered an army of over 100,000. Of this host, the Mamluk Guard was the only disciplined striking force. Then, while they were preparing to defend Cairo, Baibars heard that Hulagu had withdrawn, leaving a Mongol army behind him in Palestine. He decided at once to do an unheard of thing, to attack that army. The Mamluks moved up from the coast cautiously to discover what the Crusaders in their fortified seaports might be doing about the situation. The knights, apparently in complete ignorance and certainly without instructions from Europe, were doing nothing except drive off the Mongol patrols that ventured too near. Kutuz and Baibars satisfied themselves of this when they actually camped near the walls of Acre and bought food from the Crusaders there before moving up to the plain of Galilee, where Kitboga was camped, near the Ain Jalut, the well of Goliath. Now, the Bible kind of contrasts the story of like three different Goliath fighters, right? Which could have all been true. It doesn't mean there's, if you look at what the term means, a big, strong, basically the giants that people had, the giants or the big or the top fighter or something go out, and they would fight before the rest of them would fight. And in spite of odds of 4-1 against him, Kitboga gave battle, brushing aside the Egyptian-like cavalry. I mean, not at this time, but back in the day, in the ancient time, the heavy Mongol regiments attacked from the right wing, sweeping Tulugma attack that proved successful so often. It prevailed against the Egyptians. Fearful at the beginning, they gave way before the weight of the Mongol sweep. Baibars had counted on this. He had planned to use Mongol tactics against Kitboga, holding back his best men, including the guard, in ambush. His counterattack took Kitboga by surprise. Heavily outnumbered and affected by the late summer heat, the Mongols were broken and driven off at speed. The contingents of Georgians and Armenians on foot proved to be useless in this rapid maneuvering. Kitboga was urged by his Noyons to join the flight, but refused, saying, "Someone else can tell the Khan how I died, and what is the loss of an army such as this to Hulagu Khan? Have the Mongol women seized to breed sons? Are the mares to drop foals?" Oh, at the Mongol women ceased to breed sons, are the mares to drop foals? It was not a wise decision. Taken captive, Kitboga was dragged before the Mamluk leaders and mocked. "You, who have broken so many empires, how does it feel to be bound in your turn?" Kitboga answered, "I know this. All my life I have served my master, while you have made yourselves great by slaying yours. After my death, all of you and all that belongs to you will be trampled under the hooves of the Mongol horses. The Mongol horsemen will carry away the sands of Egypt in their saddlebags." The Mamluks cut off his head and fastened it on a pole. And his boast, which he believed to be a matter of simple truth, did not prove true. Kutus and Baibars paraded the captive Mongols in triumph in the streets of Cairo before mutilating and killing them. And again, that's not, Islam doesn't allow for trophies of body parts and, the carrying off of the things. If someone, is executed, someone's executed, but the mutilation, just, that sort of things, it's not off the battlefield. In that way, if people are seized and it's like, oh, this person has to be executed, then they take care of that. But this is something different.